The situation in West Papua is urgent and needs your attention. An estimated 500,000 West Papuans have been murdered at the hands of the Indonesian government and military forces, and countless more have been displaced from their ancestral lands. The human suffering and environmental destruction cannot be overestimated. The time to act for West Papua is now. This is a short introduction to what is going on in West Papua, giving a brief historical overview of the region and detailing the ongoing human rights abuses, which have resulted in the death of an estimated 500,000 West Papuan people. It will then explain some of the work that Grassroots for West Papua are doing and what actions you can take to fight for a free West Papua. We warmly invite you to join the private group. Please find us on Facebook at Grassroots for West Papua and follow us on Twitter, once again by searching Grassroots for West Papua.
Now for a brief history of West Papua. West Papua is a region in East Asia, on the western half of the island of New Guinea, and bordering Papua New Guinea, lying about 200 kilometres north of Australia. West Papua is famous for its Raja Ampat Islands, commonly known as the Four Kings, which are a scattering of around 1,500 tropical islands containing the richest marine biodiversity on Earth. With vast tracts of coral reef, clear waters, and a host of tropical marine wildlife. Much of West Papua is still largely covered with virgin rainforest and is home to a great diversity of plant and animal species, including rare orchids, birds of paradise, and even tree kangaroos. Around 250 unique tribes call West Papua home, all with their own traditions, languages, and cultures, with most of these tribes living either traditional subsistence lifestyles, only growing enough food to live on, or living a more nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Without a doubt, West Papua is a place of exceptional natural beauty. However, since the beginning of the colonial era, West Papua has been routinely plundered of its resources by occupying forces, with the region losing approximately 1/3 of its rainforest since the 1960s. Following independence in 1949 and ending 300 years of Dutch colonial rule, Indonesia claimed much of the Netherlands' former territory, including West Papua, then known as Western New Guinea, despite the fact that the region was already inhabited by the indigenous West Papuan people, who had called the region home for over 3,000 years.
The Netherlands refused to transfer sovereignty in order to retain the resource-rich territory, and the West Papuan people soon found themselves stuck in the middle of the West New Guinea dispute, on the grounds that the West Papuans were too ethnically different from the Indonesian majority to live peacefully together. The Dutch government decided to prepare West Papua to be an independent nation. However, caring little for the welfare of the native inhabitants, the Dutch government did little to prepare the fledgling nation for independence, failing to invest in the provision of good infrastructure. Additionally, there was little effort from the Netherlands to prepare West Papuans to hold high office, and there was little to no civil service training. The United States were happy for the continuation of Dutch control over the region, as were the United Kingdom and Australia, who at the time did not want an Indonesian West Papua, as this would be too close to Australia. This being at the height of the Cold War era, when Western nations were increasingly concerned about the spread of communism. The USA in particular were determined to avoid the spread of communism to Indonesia, given its inherent strategic geopolitical importance in East Asia. However, with the Communist Party in Indonesia becoming increasingly popular, being the fourth largest party in the 1955 elections, and fearful of driving then President Sukarno into the arms of the Soviet government, it was deemed to be necessary by the USA and its allies to cease opposition to an Indonesian takeover of West Papua.
After a decade of tension between the Netherlands, the US and Australia, Cold War politics facilitated the end of opposition to the Indonesian takeover, and Papuan calls for independence remained unheard. During the 1960s, under the influence of the Kennedy administration, there was an abrupt turnaround, and the New York Agreement in 1962 signalled the end of Dutch colonial rule in West Papua and the beginning of Indonesian control. With no indigenous Papuan representation and no consultation with the people who had lived in the area for millennia, the New York Agreement was a betrayal of the West Papuan people and the wish to be an independent state. Instead, the Indonesian government waged a colonial invasion, annexing West Papua and slaughtering up to 500,000 indigenous tribal people since 1962. Sovereignty was transferred in 1963 under the proviso that Indonesia would facilitate a people's referendum to ask about their willingness to be incorporated into the Indonesian state. This so-called active free choice was finally held in 1969 and was characterised by intimidation, voter suppression, and threats to West Papuan independence leaders from the Indonesian government. Selected representatives were made to vote at gunpoint, and the event became popularly known as the Act of No Choice. Indonesian General Ali Muatopo, speaking to West Papuan delegates during the Act of Free Choice, said, "This is what will happen to anyone who votes against Indonesia. Their accursed tongues will be torn out, their mouths will be wrenched open. Upon them will fall the vengeance of the Indonesian people. I myself will shoot them on the spot." The UN, understaffed and underfunded, failed to ensure that the promised free and fair vote took place. At least one delegate was shot for refusing to comply, and the outcome, to remain as part of Indonesia, was a sham and a complete betrayal of the West Papuan people.
Since the Indonesian takeover, the West Papuan people have been struggling for a free and fair independence referendum, but these movements have been violently repressed by the Indonesian government, who have killed an estimated 500,000 West Papuans to date. Since the 1960s, the Indonesian military forces have led an extensive campaign against the indigenous population, displacing them and denying tribes access to their ancestral lands and hunting grounds, these lands being sold off to private companies for resource exploitation. A genocidal colonial project inherently founded upon racist attitudes towards the Melanesian West Papuans. An article by Yale Law School in 2004 found that given the available evidence, there is a strong indication that the Indonesian government has committed genocide against the West Papuans, with entire tribes becoming extinct and whole towns and villages being massacred. The Biak massacre in 1998 demonstrates the true extent of Indonesian military violent practices, where over 200 people, including women and children, were rounded up by soldiers and forced onto boats. They were then taken to sea and thrown overboard, where they perished. This is just one example of a long list of extreme human rights abuses committed by the Indonesian government against the native West Papuans. The use of torture by the military is endemic and well documented, due to the fact that soldiers frequently capture trophy footage of the abuse. Sexual assault and rape have been consistently used by soldiers and police. A 1999 UN report on violence against women highlighted that rape was used as an instrument of torture and intimidation, and torture of women detained by Indonesian security forces was widespread. There's also been a total suppression of free expression in West Papua, with the independence flag, the flag of the Morning Star, being outlawed, along with many tribal customs, in a bid to crush West Papuan identity. Raising the West Papuan flag is punishable by 11 years imprisonment, sometimes more, with 6 West Papuan men from Biak sentenced to 14 years in 2014. There is a silent genocide in West Papua, which is still ongoing, and with a total ban on foreign journalists and NGOs, we must all do what we can to help raise awareness of the crimes of the Indonesian government and help make West Papua free.
A vast and beautiful land, the region of West Papua accounts for around 22% of Indonesia's territory, with the mineral-rich and luscious virgin rainforest being primarily sold off to private companies for resource exploitation. The Indonesian occupation of West Papua is directly related to corporate interests. The US company Freeport McMoran operates the Grasberg mine in West Papua, the largest gold mine and the 3rd largest copper mine in the world. Freeport's 3rd largest shareholder, Carl Icahn, also happens to be special advisor to Donald Trump. Freeport is Indonesia's biggest taxpayer, making billions of dollars for the Indonesian government every year and reportedly paying the Indonesian military around $3 million a year in protection money to ensure that West Papuans are kept out of the area. In 2015 alone, Freeport mined some $3.1 billion worth of gold and copper here. In addition, West Papua boasts timber resources worth an estimated $78 billion. In respect of the history behind Freeport's mining in West Papua, a contract was signed for Freeport to operate in West Papua before they were even part of Indonesia. With the help of Henry Kissinger, Freeport was awarded the rights to pillage West Papua. Kissinger later became a Freeport board member. Australian-British corporation Rio Tinto also holds an interest in Freeport Grasberg mine, which entitles it to 40% of production over specified levels until 2021. So that's 40% of all production until 2021. Meanwhile, the British company BP continues to profit from this brutal and murderous occupation of West Papua through its massive liquefied natural gas fields. BP's biggest operation in Southeast Asia is in West Papua, and Papuan communities are also being pushed from out of their land for palm oil. According to Corpwatch, an indigenous community in West Papua filed a complaint against the Sri Lankan company Good Hope Asia for taking over their land to create a palm oil plantation. The natural beauty of West Papua is being destroyed, with the region losing more than 420,000 hectares since 2001. With vast swaths of rainforest being cut down for the logging industry and to make way for lucrative palm oil plantations, all at the expense of West Papua's luscious environment. Illegal logging is also widespread, with companies bribing the military for protection and West Papuan citizens being robbed of their land, unable to grow food for a living. So this brings me nicely onto the West Papuan independence movement. Benny Wanda and the fight for the freedom of West Papua. The face of the movement for West Papua in the UK is led by the West Papuan independence leader for the United Liberation Movement for West Papua and the founder of the Free West Papua campaign. In 1977, Indonesian military occupiers entered Benny Wanda's village. Benny states in his autobiography that his mother and aunties would be stopped and checked by Indonesian soldiers. Often the soldiers would force the women to wash themselves in the river before brutally raping them in front of their children. Many of these young women, including 3 of Benny's aunts, died in the jungle from the trauma and injuries inflicted during these attacks. Many of these injuries and attacks also involved genital mutilation. More information on this can be found online. In those days, every day Papuan women would report to the military post to provide food from their gardens and to cook and clean for the soldiers. Violence, racism, sexual slavery, and enforced subservience became part of the daily routine. Between 1977 and 1983, Benny and his family, along with the thousands of other Highlanders, started living and hiding in the jungle. And after 5 years in the jungle, everyone else from his village had succumbed to the conditions and unfortunately were forced to surrender to the Indonesians. Only his family remained in the jungle. To surrender, the West Papuans had to present themselves to the local military post carrying an Indonesian flag, which signalled their supposed loyalty to Indonesia and their willingness to live in the community under Indonesia's brutal, genocidal, and murderous rule. The years went on and Benny became politically involved in a secret resistance movement aimed at freeing the West Papuan people from Indonesia's illegal occupation. So much so that in 2002, Mr. Wenda was looking at a 25-year prison sentence imposed by the colonizing state of Indonesia, all because of his political aspirations. Luckily, Mr. Wenda was able to escape into exile to the UK, but this did not stop Indonesia in 2012 from issuing an international arrest warrant for Benny's arrest through Interpol. This move was widely attacked as a ploy to silence Benny and prevent him from travelling overseas to campaign for West Papuan self-determination and the freedom of the West Papuan people. Fair Trials International led an appeal to have the red notice removed so that Benny could once again travel freely. In August 2012, a landmark case which involved Interpol led to the removal of this red notice against Benny after an investigation concluded that the Indonesian government had abused the system in a politically motivated attempt to silence Benny and the cries of the West Papuan people. History was made in June 2015 when the United Liberation Movement for West Papua was granted observer status by the Melanesian Spearhead Group MSG in the sub-regional bloc. The Pacific winds of change have made it impossible for Melanesian leaders to ignore the rapidly growing support for the people of West Papua and the freedom that they are entitled to. The next focus for the United Liberation Movement Front of West Papua is applying for full membership to the Melanesian Spearhead Group and eventually forcing the issue of West Papua onto the United Nations. Mr. Wenda has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize and has been awarded the Freedom of Oxford, the highest honour the city of Oxford can bestow and one of the oldest surviving traditional ceremonies still in existence. Previous recipients have included Nelson Mandela. In 2015, Mr. Wenda embarked on his first official tour of South Africa, aimed at building support for the self-determination and to highlight the struggle of the people in occupied West Papua. He met with a number of the leaders whilst he was there, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu. As previously stated, Mr. Wenda spent his earlier life living in West Papua under Indonesia's brutal authority, where he watched and witnessed his family members becoming victims to violence, racism, enforced subservience, and sadly murder. For calling for the freedom of the West Papuan people, Indonesia's brutal occupation and freedom from this, Mr. Wenda has now been living in exile in the UK for the last 25 years, after he was unfairly sentenced by Indonesia to a prison sentence for trying to obtain freedom for his people. If you would like to learn more about Benny Wenda and his struggle for the West Papuan people in Indonesia's hidden colony, there's a documentary can be found which is called The Road Home. Wenda's documentary won an award for Best Documentary Feature at the 2016 Amsterdam Film Festival, and the document can be found online. This really is a short introduction to the legacy of Mr. Wenda, and what I have described really does not do much justice to what he has achieved for the West Papuan people, but a lot more needs to be done. Please follow the Free West Papua campaign, which also contains details of Mr. Wenda's autobiography and contains information on the current situation in West Papua, as well as actions on what you can do to help bring about the freedom of the West Papuan people.
Grassroots for West Papua are a group of individuals from across the UK who are committed to campaigning for the freedom of West Papua through a three-way approach. Firstly, by lobbying government at a local, international level. We aim to put pressure on the UK to cease their sales of arms to Indonesia and to support the facilitation of an independence referendum in West Papua. Secondly, the group works to encourage an understanding of the situation in West Papua by organising and promoting educational resources, events, and highlighting important updates on the situation in West Papua. Finally, Grassroots for West Papua are committed to mobilising grassroots activists to participate in the campaign, both virtually and in the physical world, in order to draw attention to the racist, imperialist occupation of West Papua, which continues to receive virtually no international attention and goes unchallenged by international institutions. Chandni Chopra qualified as a criminal defence solicitor 4 years ago and currently works for the EU in their asylum support department. She embarked on a human rights AIDS missions in the occupied West Bank of Palestine, the 12 Palestinian refugee camps of Lebanon, the jungle camp of Calais, and led youth employment initiative in Tanzania. For over 7 years, she's worked with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign to highlight the UK arms trade with Israel, the theft of Palestinian land, and the brutal siege of Gaza. Katie Osborne, who is a recent graduate from Newcastle University, where she studied her BA in politics, focusing her dissertation on political communications research, and the BBC. A keen activist, Katie has spent the past 5 years campaigning for a socialist government in Britain. Dick Curran is a long-standing member of Amnesty International. He is a school speaker for the organisation and has been secretary of the Newcastle local group for the past 7 years. He has worked on a number of human rights campaigns, including recognising the Rohingya people of Burma, defending the peace community of San Jose de Apartado and indigenous groups in Colombia, as well as a campaign against hate crime in this country. Mick Bowman is a lifelong trade unionist and political activist, currently working as an apolitical advisor. After a long career as a mental health social worker, he has been an active campaigner on international issues, particularly in relation to Palestine. He's visited the West Bank twice, and in 2012 he led a trade union delegation to meet with the unionists, and in 2017 was part of a delegation to Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. Finally, just to give you a bit of background about myself, I'm Meru Shah, a passionate activist campaigning here in my hometown of Newcastle for causes that are very important to me and very close to my heart. Been involved with a lot of organisations, but there's a few I'd like to name that are local based. TuneAid, a massive one that's close to my heart. Over the last 4 or 5 years, been getting involved leading up to Christmas to basically raise 100k for Christmas Day for Newcastle-based food banks. So it's giving back to the people here kind of thing. And being from Newcastle, it's one of those things that you do if you're a Geordie through and through, you look after your own. So remember looking at that 100k for Christmas Day for the Newcastle food banks. Also involved with Newcastle Unite's Stand Up to Racism. Quite an outspoken humanitarian, pretty much dedicated what's left of my life to fight for a better world, for not just for me, but for all of us. And that's about it. Thank you.
Our Zoom events. In August, Grassroots for West Papua hosted their first event virtually on Zoom and featured some fantastic speakers who gave an in-depth account of the situation in West Papua. And together we discussed what actions to take and how to do more to raise awareness of the brutal Indonesian occupation. The recording of this Zoom event can be found on our Facebook and Twitter pages.
Hi, the UK trade union movement could and should be taking a lead in showing practical solidarity with the indigenous people of West Papua in their struggle for justice. And we at Grassroots for West Papua are starting work and trying to make this happen. A basic tenet of trade unionism is that an injury to one is an injury to all. And the practical solidarity which comes of this is a guiding principle on which trade unionists should and do operate both nationally and internationally. And this is shown in the international solidarity work which UK trade unions do in relation to Palestine, in support of the indigenous Palestinian people and their struggle against Israeli colonial settlers. It's shown in the support we give in Colombia to Colombian trade unionists and to indigenous people who are both struggling against a neoliberal regime which is forcing people off their land and denying workers their basic rights. And we see it in terms of the international solidarity shown for workers and indigenous people in the Philippines as well. There's no reason why this same practical solidarity couldn't be shown to the indigenous West Papuan people. We have to remember that the value of international solidarity from the trade union movement is potentially huge. Trade unions are the largest civic society organisation, if you like, in the UK. They still have over 6 million members, it's about 6.5 million members, and still do have considerable political leverage. We want to make sure that this leverage, if you like, and the resources which are at the disposal of trade unions are put to the use of showing international solidarity with people from West Papua. And as I say, we're starting work on this. The value of this is huge. As I've said, trade unions represent 6.5 million people in this country, and our international networks are a fantastic way of spreading awareness amongst the membership of issues, for example, such as what is happening to the indigenous people of West Papua. Trade unions have considerable resources at their disposal, which they could use to support local groups which are engaged in the movement for justice for the indigenous people of West Papua. They could maybe form local alliances, provide support in the way of help with producing leaflets, all that sort of thing. And also they can use their political leverage. Within the Labour Party, for example, there are 12 trade unions which are affiliated to the Labour Party. So that is a channel which the trade unions can use to try and influence the parliamentary process as well. So the work which we're doing at the moment, which we've just started on, we are looking to see if the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, would be willing to start looking at this issue, and we've sent them materials on the situation in West Papua. And we're also focusing on one particular trade union, which is Unison, which is the largest trade union, represents about 1.3 million workers, majority of whom work in the public sector. Unison have a very well-established record of international solidarity, across a whole range of issues. They have an international unit in London. They have regional structures at which they have a regional international officer, and at a branch level, they also have international officers there. So we're starting to do work through Unison structures to try and see if we can get the union nationally to take up a policy in relation to West Papua. And the process to do that is that we need to get a motion through to the annual delegates conference. This can either come through the regional structures or through the branches. So we're starting work with Unison activists who are also involved in the movement for justice for the indigenous people of West Papua to try and push that forward. So appealing to people, all of you who are in a trade union, and those of you who aren't in a trade union, if your employment situation allows to join a trade union and get involved and use the structures that are available through your trade union, for example, through Unison, but also through other unions such as the NEU, then the National Education Unit, or the PCS, all of whom have good international units, to try and get the awareness raised about the movement for justice for the people of West Papua. Finally, I'm where it's appropriate that I'm making this appeal today, if you like, because today is a day of action by a local, well, it started off as a local, but now it's a national anti-racism organisation called Show Racism the Red Card, hence the T-shirt I'm wearing today. So let's take action to kick out Indonesian racism from West Papua and help bring freedom to the indigenous people of West Papua. Thank you very much. Bye now.
We've also set up a petition asking to end the UK arms trade with Indonesia. The example of East Timor shows how international pressure can be effective in helping people pursuing the right to self-determination to achieve their goals against what might at times seem like overwhelming odds. The British government currently supplies the Indonesian regime with arms and helps train groups such as Detachment 88 and the Kopassus elite security forces used in the suppression of dissent, as documented, for example, by Human Rights Watch in 2011. Nowhere is this done more brutally than in West Papua. We have therefore put together a petition requesting that Parliament debates the issue of ceasing the arms trade with Indonesia until the people of West Papua are granted a free and fair vote on their future, as promised 60 years ago. This might seem like a small step in the process, but we believe it will be highly effective as part of a global campaign to expose what is happening in West Papua and put pressure on the Indonesian government. Below is the petition we have drafted, and there will soon be a link made available by the House of Commons Petitions Committee. Once it is, we'll publish it as widely as possible to get enough signatures for it to be brought before Parliament. The petition is worded like this: stop arms sales to Indonesia until West Papua has a free self-determination vote. The British government should show its support for the growing calls for West Papua to be allowed a free and fair vote on self-determination, as promised when it was ceded to Indonesia in 1963. The example of East Timor shows how such pressure can work. There have been many reports of human rights abuses and violent suppressions of dissent from organisations including Amnesty International, but Britain continues to trade arms with Indonesia and train its military. Suppressing arms sales until such a vote is granted would demonstrate the British government's commitment to the articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
In December, that's the first date of the yearly global flag raising for West Papua. Please join us in raising the Morning Star flag on this day, which marks the anniversary of the first raising of the West Papua flag, a symbol of their independence. If you would like to take part on December the 1st, please don't forget to take a picture of your flag using the hashtags hashtag global flag raising, and hashtag Free West Papua. And if you send us your picture, we will display them on our page. Thank you.
The Indonesian government have murdered 500,000 West Papuans since their occupation took place in the late 1960s. Entire tribes have become extinct due to the genocide, and this genocide is still happening now. It is still happening on our watch. Many who survive have lost access to their ancestral lands due to the Indonesian government selling vast swaths of virgin rainforest to companies for resource exploitation. This conflict is not just about land, it's inherently racist. It's a colonial assault on the Melanesians who have lived there for millennia and generations, but are now in the way, and the Indonesian government and army are working to drive them out by any means, however brutal, however possible, for commercial and political gain. Please feel free to look up the various massacres which have happened since Indonesia brutally colonized the land of West Papua. It is gut-wrenching. There is a total ban on foreign media, NGOs and humanitarian agencies entering occupied West Papua. So events like this are vital in letting the world know what is happening to the West Papuan people. They've been fighting for their independence and they have been struggling for decades. And with little to no attention in the mainstream media or on the agendas of international communities, it is us who must do something about it. Please join us by supporting the Free West Papua campaign, and please also find us on Grassroots for West Papua. Please find us on Facebook and see what you can do to help the people of West Papua.
10 ways to take direct action in West Papua. 1. Donate to the Free West Papua campaign. Details of this can be found at www.freewestpapua.org/actions/donate. 2. Lobby your MPs. Write to your MP and ask them to raise the West Papuan right to self-determination in Parliament. 3. Ask your MP to join the International Parliamentarians for West Papua and the All-Party Parliamentary Group on West Papua. 4. Ask your MP to sign the Westminster Declaration, which calls for an internationally supervised vote on the self-determination of West Papua. Parliamentarians can sign this by contacting office@freewestpapua.org. 5. Ask your MP and other local representatives to put pressure on the UK government to stop arms sales to Indonesia, on the grounds that these weapons are used to terrorise Papuan civilians. Please see our petition on this. 6. Like and follow Free West Papua campaign on Facebook and keep up to date with the news and campaign events. 7. Spread the word on social media, using hashtags like Free West Papua and Referendum Yes to raise awareness of the Free West Papua campaign and Papuan calls for an independence referendum. 8. Tell your family, friends and colleagues about what's happening in West Papua. The worldwide anti-racist movement has united individuals across the globe in fighting for the rights of oppressed peoples. Please do what you can to raise awareness of the West Papuan independence struggle, which is often overlooked by the international press. 9. Join the global demonstration held every year on December the 1st, where masses of people from around the world will raise the flag of West Papua and show their support for the freedom of the country. Buy or make your own Morning Star flag to raise on the 1st of December. 10. Demonstrate. Join a Free West Papua demonstration or host your own to raise awareness and support for West Papuan freedom. Please also follow Grassroots for West Papua on Facebook and Twitter to keep up to date with any future news and events.
Thank you very much for listening to this recording and attending the London Anarchist Bookfair 2020. And please don't forget to join our campaign. As always, Free West Papua.